I've worked a fair number of retail jobs in my life, so I've had my share of terrible managers and horrendous customers. However, one manager takes the cake. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was working the closing shift at the small clothing store in the heart of the city. The manager, a tall and lanky man named Mr. Blackwell, had a reputation for being strict and unyielding. I had only been working there for a few weeks, but I had already seen his temper flare on more than one occasion. That night, as I was restocking the shelves, I heard a loud crash from the back room. I rushed to see what might have happened, only to find Mr. Blackwell standing over a pile of broken mannequins, his face contorted in anger. He turned to me, his eyes dark with rage, and said, "Clean this up, now." I quickly started picking up the pieces of the broken mannequins, trying not to make eye contact with him. As I worked, I could feel his eyes boring into me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The store was empty, and the silence was deafening. The only sound was the click of Mr. Blackwell's heels as he paced back and forth, muttering to himself. I finished cleaning up the mess as fast as I could, and then I just stood there, feeling a chill run down my spine. Finally, Mr. Blackwell replied, telling me that I was done for the night and to go home. His voice was low and menacing, and I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my coat and rushed out of the store, not daring to look back. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something terrible, though I had no idea what. The next day, I arrived at work to find the store closed. A sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations." I tried calling Mr. Blackwell, but his phone was disconnected. I actually never saw him again. Rumors swirled around the store, and I heard whispers that Mr. Blackwell had been involved in some shady business dealings. Some said he had disappeared to avoid getting caught. Others said he had met a more sinister fate. To this day, I still don't know the entire backstory, but I do know that the night I worked with him was the scariest night of my life. During my college years, I worked various retail jobs to help make ends meet, and I had the pleasure of interacting with many, shall we say, interesting people. But there was one job in particular that left a lasting impression on me, not because of the customers, but because of the eerie events that unfolded within the store itself. It was a small, old-fashioned shop tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, specializing in antiques and vintage items. The owner, Mr. Jenkins, was a kind elderly man with a passion for history and a knack for finding unique pieces. However, there was something off about the place, a feeling that always lingered in the air, as if the past was not quite ready to let go of its hold on the items that filled the shelves. One evening, as I was closing up the shop, I noticed a flickering light coming from the back room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured into the dimly lit space to investigate. As I approached the source of the light, I realized it was coming from an old, ornate mirror that Mr. Jenkins had recently acquired. The surface of the mirror seemed to ripple and distort, like a reflection in a disturbed pond. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A face, not my own, staring back at me from within the glass. It was a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing, her mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled back, my mind racing with fear and confusion. From that day on, strange occurrences plagued the shop. Items would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and the air would grow cold and heavy. Customers began to complain of feeling watched, and some even reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman. Mr. Jenkins, however, seemed unfazed by it all. He would simply smile and say, "The past is a way of making itself known, my dear. It's best not to dwell on it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play, something that the old man was hiding from me. As the days turned into weeks, the hauntings grew more frequent and intense, until one night, when I was alone in the shop, I heard a soft, mournful voice calling my name. I followed the sound to the back room where the mirror stood, its surface shimmering in the moonlight. The woman's face was clearer now, her eyes pleading with me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice like a gentle breeze. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and reached out to touch the mirror, my fingers trembling as they made contact with the cold glass. The world around me faded away, and I found myself standing in a different time and a different place. The woman was there, her face filled with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "You've set me free." As the vision faded, I was left standing in the back room of the shop, the mirror now just an ordinary piece of glass. The air was lighter, and the feeling of dread was gone. Mr. Jenkins never spoke of what happened that night, but I knew that the past had finally let go of its hold on the shop, and on me. I used to work with this one guy named Dylan restocking shelves for barely any money. Dylan was one weird dude, and he definitely had some issues. It was a typical night at the grocery store, just me and Dylan working the graveyard shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the empty aisles. Dylan was always on the quiet side, but tonight he seemed even more withdrawn than usual. I tried to make small talk, but he just grunted in response. As we made our way through the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even more than usual. Dylan kept glancing over his shoulder, as if he was expecting someone to jump out at him. Eventually I asked him if he was okay, but he just mumbled something about the voices. That's when things started to get really weird. Dylan began to talk to himself, muttering under his breath in a language I couldn't understand. He would suddenly stop in the middle of an aisle, staring off into space as if he was seeing something I couldn't. The final straw came when we reached the back of the store, near the loading dock. Dylan suddenly stopped and turned to me, his eyes wide and unblinking. "They're coming," he whispered. "They're coming for us." Before I could respond, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Then I heard a strange gurgling sound, and then a scream that chilled me to the bone. When the lights flickered back on, Dylan was gone. I ran to the front of the store, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, but as I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had Dylan seen? And would they come for me next? Back in the 90s, I used to work for an electronics store which has since gone out of business. It was a small family-owned shop that specialized in selling and repairing old video games and consoles. I was in charge of the repair department, fixing everything from broken NES cartridges to faulty Sega Genesis controllers. One day, a customer came in with an old Atari 2600 console that was not working. I took it to the back room to take a closer look, but as soon as I opened the console, I felt a chill run down my spine. The insides were covered in a thick layer of dust, and there was a strange, musty smell emanating from it. I managed to shrug it off and started to clean the console. As I was wiping the dust away, though, I noticed something strange. There were scratches on the inside of the console, as if someone had taken a sharp object to it. Still, I tried to ignore it and continued with my work. That night, I had a strange dream. I was back in the store, but it was dark and empty. I could hear whispers coming from the back room. I walked towards the sound, and as I got closer, I could see a figure hunched over the Atari 2600. It was a young boy, no older than 10, with a totally blank expression on his face. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were empty, soulless. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The boy started to laugh, a cold, hollow laugh that echoed through the empty store. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the dream, but it stayed with me throughout the day. When I got to work, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. After all, the Atari 2600 was still in that back room. That night, I had another dream. The boy was back, but this time he was standing in front of me, holding the Atari 2600. He started to speak, his voice raspy and unnatural. "Play with me," he said. "Let's play a game." I woke up screaming, and that's when I knew I had to get rid of the console. I took it to the dumpster behind the store and threw it away, but even as I walked away, I could feel the boy's presence, watching me. To this day, I still have nightmares about that Atari 2600. I never found out who the boy was, or what happened to him. But I know that there was something wrong with that console, something evil, and I'll never forget the day I brought it into the store. I used to work in the gardening department of a larger home improvement store, a place where I thought I could find some peace and quiet among the plants and tools. Little did I know that this seemingly mundane job would lead me down a path of terror and mystery. It all started with the arrival of a new shipment of plants. They were exotic and beautiful, and really unlike anything I had seen before. The store manager, Mr. Jenkins, seemed particularly excited about them for some reason. He instructed me to take extra care in their placement and maintenance. As I began to tend to these mysterious plants, strange things started to happen. A few times customers reported feeling uneasy around them, claiming that the plants seemed to be whispering to them in a language they couldn't understand. I dismissed these claims as mere superstition until I started hearing the whispers myself. At first, it was just a faint murmur, barely audible above the hum of the store's fluorescent lights, but as the days passed, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They spoke of ancient secrets, of forgotten gods, and of a dark power that lay dormant within the heart of the plants. I tried to ignore the whispers, focusing on my work and trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But the more I tried to push them away, the stronger they became. They began to invade my dreams, showing me visions of a world consumed by darkness and chaos. One night, as I was closing up the store, I heard the whispers more clearly than ever before. They were calling out to me, beckoning me to come closer. I found myself drawn to the center of the gardening department, where the exotic plants stood tall and imposing. As I approached, I could feel a cold chill run down my spine. The plants seemed to be pulsating with an otherworldly energy, their leaves and flowers shimmering with an eerie light. I reached out to touch one of them, and as my fingers brushed against its delicate petals, I felt a surge of power course through my body. In that moment, I realized that I had become something more than human. The whispers had transformed me, granting me powers beyond my wildest imagination. But with these powers came a terrible curse, a hunger for knowledge that could never be sated. I left the store that night, my mind reeling with the possibilities of what I could do with my newfound abilities, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unleashed something dark and dangerous into the world. To this day, I can still hear the whispers, calling out to me from the shadows. I know that I'll never be free of them, and that the darkness that lies within me will consume me in the end. But, until that day comes, I will continue to walk the path of the unknown, forever haunted by the horrors of the gardening department. I worked for a large clothing store chain in my early 20s, and I could tell a number of scary and bizarre stories. However, there's really only one that forever stands out in my mind. It was the night of our annual inventory, a time when the store was closed to the public and we had to count every piece of merchandise. It was a tedious task, but it was made bearable by the camaraderie among the staff. We joked, laughed, and shared stories to pass the time. As the night wore on, the store grew quieter. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, casting long shadows across the aisles. It was around 2 a.m. when I started to feel uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every now and then, I could swear I could hear this faint rustling sound coming from the back of the store. At first I dismissed it as my imagination, but the feeling persisted. My coworker, Sarah, who was working in the same section as me, seemed to sense my unease. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, and we both froze, listening intently. The rustling grew louder, and then it stopped. We exchanged nervous glances and decided to investigate. As we approached the back of the store, the rustling started again, louder this time. We turned the corner to find a mannequin standing in the middle of the aisle. Its head was turned towards us, and its eyes seemed to follow our every move. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We quickly backed away, our hearts racing. We decided to gather the rest of the staff and leave the store immediately. As we made our way to the front, we heard more rustling, this time from multiple directions. The mannequins were moving, their heads turning to watch us as we passed. We all ran out of that store, not daring to look back. The next day, we reported the incident to our manager, but he dismissed it as a prank. However, none of us could shake the feeling that something sinister had happened that night. To this day, I still wonder what really did happen in that store. Was it a prank? Or was there something more sinister at play? I never found out, but I will never forget the night the mannequins watched us. I used to work this really crummy retail job. I swear the only thing that kept me sane was the fact that there was this field right next to the store, and I could just stand by some of the windows and gaze out at it. The field was vast, stretching out into the horizon, a sea of green and gold that seemed to promise a peace and tranquility I could only dream of while trapped behind the counter. It was a particularly slow day when I first noticed the scarecrow. It was a simple thing, just a few sticks and some old clothes, but there was something about it that sent a shiver down my spine. It stood at the edge of the field, its head turned towards the store, as if it was watching me. As the days passed, the scarecrow became a regular fixture in my life, mostly because I had nothing else to stare at. I would glance out the window, and there it would be, always in the same spot, always facing the store. It eventually got unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. Then one night, as I was closing up, I saw it. The scarecrow was gone. I told myself it must have fallen over or been moved, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I had a creeping sense of dread as I walked to my car, my eyes scanning the field for any sign of the scarecrow. That night, I even dreamed of the scarecrow. It was standing at the foot of my bed, its empty eyes staring into mine. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The next day, the scarecrow was back in its usual spot, but this time it was closer to the store. I could see it more clearly now, and the sight of it made my stomach churn. It was as if it was slowly inching its way towards me. I tried to tell my coworkers about the scarecrow, but they just laughed and told me I was being paranoid. They didn't understand. They didn't see the way it looked at me, the way it seemed to be coming closer and closer every day. Finally, one night as I was closing up, I saw it again. The scarecrow was right outside the store this time, its arms outstretched as if reaching for me. I ran to my car, my heart pounding in my chest, and drove away as fast as I could. I never went back to that job, and I never looked out at the field again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still see the scarecrow, standing at the edge of my vision, watching me. For a few seasons, I worked at one of those party stores as seasonal labor during Halloween. It was a chaotic yet thrilling time, filled with customers searching for the perfect costumes and decorations to make their parties unforgettable. But there was something about the store, something unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, I started noticing strange occurrences. Items would go missing from the shelves, only to reappear in a different spot, seemingly rearranged by an unseen hand. The store, once bustling with life, would fall eerily quiet, as if the spirits of Halloween had taken over. One night, as I was closing up, I heard a faint whisper coming from the back of the store. "Help me," it said, sending shivers down my spine. I turned on my flashlight and ventured into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned the corner, I saw a ghostly figure, its eyes glowing in the dim light. It was a little girl, her face pale and her dress tattered. "I'm lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to find my way home." I tried to comfort her, but then she vanished before my eyes, leaving me alone in the dark. From that night on, I could feel her presence, watching me from the shadows. She would play tricks on me, moving things around and whispering in my ear when no one else was around. At first I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head, but the more I tried to push it away, the stronger her presence became. I knew I had to do something to help her find her way home. I began researching the history of the store, looking for any clues that could explain the haunting. I discovered that the store had once been a home, and that a little girl had died there under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit had been trapped within the walls, unable to move on. I knew what I had to do. With the help of a local medium, I performed a ritual to release her spirit and help her find peace. As the ritual came to an end, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The store was quiet once more, and the little girl was finally at peace. I never worked at the party store again after that Halloween, but I'll never forget the season I spent there. It was a time of fear and uncertainty, but also of discovery and resolution. And to this day, I still wonder if the little girl's spirit truly found its way home. I'm a veteran retail worker with a number of Black Fridays under my belt. It never ceases to amaze me how petty and nasty some people can be, and more than a few times I've been concerned for my physical safety. There was this one incident, though, that I'll never forget. It was a particularly busy Black Friday, and as usual, the store was packed and tensions were high. I was working the electronics department, trying to keep up with a constant stream of customers looking for the latest deals. That's when I saw him, a man with a wild look in his eyes, pushing his way through the crowd. He was heading straight for the display of the newest gaming console that had just been released. As he got closer, I could see that he was sweating profusely, and he had a strange, almost manic energy about him. I tried to ignore him and focus on helping the other customers, but he kept getting closer and closer to me. Finally, he reached the display and grabbed one of the consoles, clutching it to his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. That's when I noticed the knife in his other hand. It was small but sharp. He was holding it in a way that made it clear he wasn't afraid to use it. My heart started racing, and I could feel the fear rising up inside of me. I tried to stay calm, to keep my voice steady as I spoke to him. "Sir, you can't take that. "It's not for sale yet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. To that, he just stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I need this," he said, his voice low and menacing, "and you're not going to stop me." I could feel the other customers starting to back away, sensing the danger. I knew I had to do something, but I was frozen, unable to move or speak. That's when the man lunged at me, the knife raised high. Instinctively, I braced myself, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. But thankfully, by some miracle, the knife never came. Instead, I heard a loud thud, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the man lying on the ground, unconscious. Behind him stood another customer, a woman with a determined look on her face. She had hit him with a display model of a vacuum cleaner, knocking him out cold. The police arrived soon after, and the man was taken away. It turned out he had a history of mental illness and had been off his medication. I was shaken, but grateful for the quick thinking of the woman who had saved me. That incident taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of working in retail, especially on Black Friday. It also showed me the power of community and the importance of looking out for each other in times of crisis. I'll never forget that day, and I'll always be grateful for the woman who stepped in to help me. I had a summer job at this one fishing and outdoor store, nestled in the heart of a small town that thrived on its love for the great outdoors. The store was old, its wooden floors creaking under the weight of years of memories and the scent of fish bait. On my first day, I was assigned to the night shift, a time when the store was supposed to be empty save for the occasional late-night fisherman. As I settled behind the counter, the manager, a gruff man with a beard that seemed to hold secrets of its own, handed me the keys and a flashlight. "Lock up at closing time, kid," he grunted, before disappearing into the shadows of the store. The night was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I busied myself with organizing the fishing tackle, the hooks glinting menacingly under the dim store lights. As I worked, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The feeling only intensified as the night wore on. The shadows seemed to lengthen, the silence becoming oppressive. I kept trying to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I grabbed the flashlight and ventured into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. The store was vast, filled with aisles of camping gear and fishing equipment. As I made my way through, the sound grew louder and more insistent. And then I saw it. A figure, hunched over in the corner, its face obscured by the darkness. It was dragging something behind it, something that left a trail of dark liquid in its wake. I froze, my mind racing. Was it a thief? A vagrant? Or something far more sinister? I tried to call out, but my voice was lost in the silence. The figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of its face. It was twisted into a grotesque mask of pain and despair. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into complete darkness. I could hear the figure moving towards me, its footsteps echoing in the stillness. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands shaking with fear. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the figure. It was a man, his clothes torn and bloodied. His eyes were wild, filled with a madness that chilled me to the bone. He lunged at me, his hands outstretched, and I screamed. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, the flashlight rolling away from me. The man was gone, but the store was filled with a sense of foreboding. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the exit, the keys slipping from my trembling hands. As I stumbled out into the night, I could hear the sound of the man's laughter echoing behind me. I never returned to that store, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something terrible happened there. Something that I was never meant to see.